In September, Japanese marketing research company Technosystems Research reported that Canon had a market share of 46.5%, up 0.7%, Sony with 26.1%, down 0.9%, and Nikon with 11.7%, up 0.4%. And with 2023 numbers just in, there's a big change in the rankings that will shock. But before we get to the details, please subscribe to this channel. It doesn't cost you anything, helps this channel grow, and keeps you up to date on the latest camera coverage. On July 18th, Japanese survey company Technosystems Research reported that Fujifilm had increased their market share to 8%, but Nikon had increased over 10% from the previous year, up 1.5% to 13.2%. But Sony made a huge shift, jumping from 26.1%, making up the previous year's loss, to 32.1%. And that leaves Canon at 41.2%. That's a staggering drop for Canon, down 5.3%. But now the gap between Sony and Canon is just under 9%. And Canon hasn't been this low since, well, going back to 2017 when it had 36.6% market share. And if we stay focused on the data back to 2017, we can see a few interesting trends. While Canon did drop 5.3% market share, they're still the market leader and up overall. However, the big story is how Nikon customers have by and large migrated to Sony and not Canon. So in 2017, Canon had 36.6% market share. Despite being a laggard to the mirrorless system, they were able to increase market share all the way up to about 47.5% or close to 50% market share. How is that possible when Sony and others were leading the mirrorless charge forward? Well, very simply is people were still enamored by Canon's DSLRs. They were selling very, very well. But in the last year, DSLR sales have collapsed and people are relying on mirrorless cameras, and that's where Sony has been leading. So that's why we see Canon significantly down over the previous year. Finally, it's caught up with them, and I'll give you a few other suggestions as to why Canon's numbers are down. But also, let's take a look at Fujifilm. If we go back to 2017, while they only had around 3.8%, they've essentially doubled their market share, growing continuously year after year, which when compared to Panasonic, well, the reason why you don't see Panasonic on this list is because, well, the data was spotty at best. For many of the years, Panasonic just didn't show up in Technosystems data. That's right. Panasonic has performed so poorly compared to the other market, and we're talking about sales here. I'm not talking about their cameras. We're talking about sales here. Panasonic has performed so poorly that they're not showing up in these numbers. Panasonic, OM System, Pentax, Leica, Hasselblad, and Sigma all make up that 5.5% slice of the market. But Sony's the true winner. They've made incredible progress since they bought Minolta, moving away from those crazy designs of the Sony Mavica to the Alpha line that we know today. And Canon could certainly have a much larger piece of the pie. But this is where we get into some of those other mitigating issues as to why they've dropped 5.3% market share. And one of them is their failure to migrate to mirrorless sooner. And the other is their failure to license the RF mount to third-party lens makers like Sigma and Tamron. Their failure at least to do that until recently when Sigma and Tamron announced RF APS-C lenses, but no full frame as yet. And for the first time ever, the first time I've been covering these market share figures, Sony is in striking distance of Canon. And I know what you might be thinking, Simon, there's still a 9% gap. There's no way that's going to happen. Well, let's just imagine for a moment that Sony has another year like they did in 2023, and Canon has another year like they did in 2023. That would put Sony at 38% and Canon down to 36.2% market share. I know what you're thinking. Canon just announced the R5 Mark II and the Canon EOS R1, and despite there being some perception that these are just minor updates, that there's not a big deal, from what I can see from pre-sales, they're selling very, very well. Record numbers of pre-sales over any other camera that I've covered in the last 5 years, including the Mark I. And that shows that these cameras are off to a very good start. But it's not just about those cameras, it's about the other cameras in the lineup. Everything has to be firing well to be able to lift up the market share numbers. But there's another problem that Canon has to fight, and as I mentioned just a few moments ago, there's that word perception. It's the perception in the marketplace that Canon has to fight. Canon wasn't always the market leader. It was Nikon. In fact, back in the film era, before the digital era really got started, Nikon had as much as 65% market share. Nikon reached their peak during the 80s. Nikon breezed through the 60s and 70s, riding high on the backs of great systems, as other manufacturers like Canon scrambled to catch up and release their own products. But Canon slowly started to chip away at that lead back in 1987 when they released the EF mount with some new capabilities. And it wasn't until the digital era that Canon finally surpassed Nikon as the #1 leader. You see, Canon might have had some 50% market share a few years back, but Sony is competing and innovating, and with that open E-mount, it's certainly having an impact on Canon's market share. And that perception that Canon is, that they have a closed system, that their glass is overpriced, that they're just not competing and innovating. And I'm not talking about the facts here, I'm talking about the perception, because it's that perception that will drive people to Sony, away from Canon, away from Nikon, away from Panasonic and those other systems. And that's what Canon has to work on here. I think that the R5 Mark II is a terrific camera. I pre-ordered it. I think the R1 is also a terrific camera. I haven't pre-ordered that one because it doesn't fit the type of marketplace that I function in. I'm not a high-speed, fast action sports type camera shooter. If I was, I would definitely get the R1 along with the 100 to 300 millimeter f2.8. While Nikon did have 65% market share at one point, it took decades for Canon to chip away at that market share before they became the market leader. It took innovations in the autofocus system, in CMOS technology, and mistakes by Nikon. So what do you think is going to happen next year in 2025 when Technosystems Research reports 2024 numbers? In the comment section down below, I'd like to see you project where you think the sales numbers are going to be. And go ahead and project where you think Panasonic's going to be. Panasonic is having a tough time. Their C-level executives have already come out and said, yeah, they're having problems, and they have to even consider spinning off or divesting or just completely closing down business units that aren't functioning. Now, we have no idea where they see Lumix in that, but with their market share in the basement with 5 other companies eking out 5.5%, it's not looking good. And where's the S1, or the successor to the S1, the S1R and the S1H? These are all things that make us a little bit nervous. I don't want to see Panasonic go anywhere. Panasonic is great at innovating new capabilities, and they were one of the first camera companies to start rapidly increasing new capabilities by offering firmware updates, by giving us waveforms, vector scopes, and all that wonderful stuff. And yes, now we're starting to see that in other cameras, such as the R5 Mark II. I don't want to see Panasonic go anywhere. It would be a sad day if it does. But in the comment section down below, give me your projections as to who you think is going to be #1 next year and what the point breakdown is going to be. Over the last, 4 years, we've seen Canon move up and down with less than a percentage point. 1 year going down, 1 year going up, but never down a significant drop of 5.3%. That is significant. And Sony, well, Sony's been on a tear. Let's bring up that graph again. Since buying out Minolta, the Alpha line has done really well. And since 2018, the system's completely taken off from around 15% to 32%. But now it's time to turn our attention to deals of the week. If you're looking at buying a new camera, let's talk about the R5 currently, because the R5 Mark II was just released. And I put out a video a few days ago about should you get the R5 Mark II, or even the Nikon Z8. Now, the R5 Mark II is a terrific camera from what we can see. While it's not a major jump forward like the Mark I was, it does offer a lot of capabilities, which I talk about in that video, from an autofocus system, from increases in dynamic range, and a few other capabilities. But for most of us, if you don't need 8K 60, and you know what, the autofocus system was fine in the R5, you can get the Mark I for $28.99, and that's a new price. If you actually look at used cameras, or even, refurbished camera units, you're going to see some incredible deals. I've seen Canon refurbs in the US at Canon USA for as low as $21.99. So if you think $4,300 is a bit too much for the R5 Mark II, well, consider the Mark I. I mean, $28.99 for new and down to around $2,000 for used and refurbished units. That's a really good deal. And we also have the Nikon Z8, also with a stack sensor and pretty much the same capabilities as the R5 Mark II, although the R5 Mark II does have a better autofocus system. But does that justify a, what, $800 difference between the two cameras? So there's a lot of really good deals on right now, and I just took a look at B&H and throughout Canon's entire lineup from the R50 all the way up to the R1, well, not the R1, the 1DX Mark III and the R3, there's some incredible deals on, not just camera bodies, but lenses. We're seeing the same thing with Nikon, with the Z6 Mark II, the Z7 Mark II, incredible sales. Too many to talk about right here, but I've got them in the description down below, some really incredible deals. We even had some Sony deals recently, but Sony, they don't like to put their stuff on sale that often. I think what Sony's seeing is they knew about these numbers before I put out this video, before Techno Research Systems published their data. They know their cameras are selling so very, very well that they don't need to put them on sale. And that's really kind of striking. We're seeing some incredible sales here from Canon and Nikon, yet Sony is, yeah, you know what? We don't need to put our stuff on sale. We are the #1 company. We just need to wait for the marketplace to realize that. And Sony's been very aggressive, and that open E-mount, I think that's been a huge benefit to them. But I want to say thank you to you. Now, for all of you that purchased the R5 Mark II on Wednesday, a big thank you to you. I only managed to say thanks to a few of you. There's been so many comments and questions, and I was absolutely beat. All I did is spend the entire rest of that day watching videos. But I want to use this opportunity to say a special thanks to you that did purchase the R5 Mark II or the R1 using my affiliate links. Thank you so much. This is really the major source of revenue for this channel. It's what makes this channel grow, and a big thanks to you. I can't say thank you enough. I was really surprised by the data that I saw from the live stream. I just got the final data from YouTube. At the peak viewing, I had 1,544 peak concurrent views. I've never seen anything like that before. That's even more than what I've seen on some camera companies when they do announcements. That was really huge. It was really big. And I think I've come up with the right formula to cover these events. Now, one thing I'm thinking of tweaking next time around is if I can somehow get the audio to come through from the presentation, but not too loud, because I think the real value is in the guest panel for us to talk about, because you can simply go to their website and listen to things. So maybe I can come up with something where I can dial up the audio a little bit so we can hear what's going on from what the camera company's announcing, and then dial it down, and then we can talk about what we just heard. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. But again, thank you very much for watching to the end of the video. It's very much appreciated. Have yourself a great day and a great week, and we'll see you again soon.